Let's go to the next talk, which is Ekaterina Borisova, who will tell us about trust and preferences over redistribution in Russia.
So I would like to tell you about our ongoing project. It's about trust and preferences or distribution in Russia. How to make it?
Maybe just leave it.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And it's an ongoing project with my colleagues from the International Center for the Study of Institutions and Development. And it's mostly an empirical paper. Now it's mostly an empirical paper. Because as I said, it's project somewhere in the middle. So first of all, about the plan of my presentation. I'll tell you a little bit about the topic, overall about the topic and the motivation for this study, then about the underlying theory and our hypothesis. Then I should also say several words about inequality and distribution policy in Russia, because it can influence our estimations, our empirical model. And then, of course, about our data, our empirical model as it looks now, and something about results and next problems to be overcome. First of all, I'll try briefly about topic and motivation. So this is our main question. We study connection between generalized trust and preferences over distribution to target groups. So to poor, homeless, veterans, distinguished people. So we study how generalized trust is connected to distribution to these different groups of people. And the motivation for this study is rather straightforward. First of all, now we know lots about how trust influences on different social, economic, and political outcomes. But we know very little about precise mechanisms of trust influence. And preference or distribution, of course, they could be such a channel. Then most results are based on large data sets such as World Value Survey, European Value Study, and so on. And it's very important for economic reforms, for current economic policy, to know whether the patterns are different for developing countries and for transition countries. And then it's already well documented that trust, generalized trust, influences preferences to redistribute in general. But particular groups of people are completely overlooked in this set of studies. Our work is based upon several strands of research. First is, of course, about importance of social capital, as I said already. Then the most important one, about determinants of preferences or distribution. And here you see, not complete, of course, but some list of factors that are studied in this literature. Factors that influence somehow preferences to redistribute in general. Of course, trust, social norms, community participation, they are also studied. And the general theoretical argument for trust papers is that high trust leads to less perceived risk of free riding. But different groups of people are not studied in this literature. And we add to the literature by studying these groups of people. And then the third strand of the literature, it deals with welfare state regimes and social capital. There is a well-known literature about different types of welfare state regimes and about how social capital is built by these welfare state regimes. Then our hypothesis looks like we assume that there are two types of two groups of people. So the needy and some people distinguished. And if an individual lives in an environment with high trust, he or she may prefer less government distribution to these needy people, poor, homeless, and others in difficult life situations, and more government distribution to support these distinguished people. Why this can be so? So there can be different theoretical explanations for this phenomenon. One of these explanations lies in a theory by Roland Benabou and Jean Tirole, theory of just world beliefs. So this theory says that if an individual believes that he lives in a just world, he will think that poor people are poor just because they are lazy. So the government shouldn't help them. That's why they don't want government distribution to these people if they have higher trust. But of course they want to reward those who work good because they live in this just world. It's not the only one theoretical explanation. I'll try to return to these theoretical explanations at the end. Then several words about inequality and distribution policy in Russia, because characteristics of welfare state regimes, they of course influence our empirical model. First of all, the share of wealth being actually redistributed. In general, in Russia, it's rather low in comparison with OECD countries. In OECD, it's about 22% of GDP. In Russia, it's about 15%. But what is more important for our study, that there is significant variation, very large variation among regions. And of course, we should take it into account. Then, existing support of different groups of people. Our system of social welfare system, Russian social welfare system, it's inherited from USSR. And USSR system had two main features. First of all, it provided basic social insurance, for example, pensions. And second, it rewarded people. For example, combat veterans, distinguished people, teachers, doctors, and so on. And it had difficulties in targeting resources towards those who are actually in need. So to poor, homeless, families with many children, and so on. And then we also should take into account current level of inequality. So in Russia it's rather high, but again, what is more important, that there is a considerable variation among regions. Then, about the data for our study. The main source for our study is the survey data. It was provided by a large Russian public opinion fund, so it's FOM. They view about 34,000 individuals in a sample, and the survey was conducted in different years, but we are interested in 4 ways: 7, 8, 9, and 11 years. And what variables do we use? First of all, of course, people's preferences or distribution target groups. Then interpersonal trust and norms of behavior. And then, of course, individual level control variables such as age, gender, so on. And then some variables that are used as regional controls. For example, other social capital variables, not only trust. Then we use official statistics to provide proper regional level controls. So I explained before some characteristics of full-phase state regimes, and some of the characteristics of these regimes, they are listed here. So we take into account social expenditures, we take into account inequality, GDP per capita, and so on. And then we use some survey measures of the quality of institutions, and of course, the most important for us, for distribution, for government distribution, is the corruption perceptions index.
Sure, there was a question, I think.
Yeah.
Is it panel or is it repeated cross-section?
No, it's so different waves of surveys. They have different sets of questions.
And sets of people too.
And people too, yeah. I'll explain it a little bit later in our empirical model. Yes, it's. Well, I'll explain. Then, our two main variables of interest are, first of all, question for distribution. You see it, how it's translated. So it's we have it only for 2011 wave. There are no other waves of surveys that contain this question. It's important for our empirical strategy. And here, people were asked, to who, in your opinion, government should help first? And there were different categories of people. You see them on the slide: poor, homeless, families with children, disabled, pensioners, so about 10 groups of people. And everybody could choose up to 3 options. Then the second question, the second variable of our interest is the question for generalized trust, and it's a rather general one. So generally speaking, would you say that most people can be trusted? And it comes in this wording for 2007 and in a little bit different wording for 2008 and 9. So, and trust is present also not only for these 3 waves, 7, 8, and 9. And we don't have question for trust for 2011. It's also important for our empirical model. Then it's just a picture, maybe I'll skip it. It's just a distribution of preferences. These are all target groups, and for example, 8% of people said that distinguished teachers and doctors, they are the priority of the government, and 32% said that war and labor veterans. Then, one of the important points about our main dependent variable. As I said, it's a distribution to different groups of people, but in our main estimation, we have an index. Why well, we construct an index and base it, so it's based upon preliminary individual level regressions of these different groups, on trust. And these individual level regressions, they gave us positive or negative points for trust. So we see that there is a positive influence of trust on redistribution preferences for war and labor veterans, for different categories of distinguished people, retired, and so on. And in these individual regressions, we have a negative influence of generalized trust on preferences for distribution to poor, homeless, families with unparent, persons who lost job, and so on. And we see no influence of trust on the distribution to disabled persons. Then we construct an index with these 2 categories of people. And as you can see, the positive points are for distinguished and negative are for the needy. So these 2 groups of people that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. Then about the second variable, trust in Russian regions. So about 20% of Russian citizens, they trust, so not very much. But again, what is important for us that there is a significant variation among regions. There are very low trust regions, and there are regions that are not so bad. Our empirical model. So here you can see 2 regressions for our model. The first one is about redistribution preferences. It's the main regression. So here, the dependent variable is the index that I described several minutes before. And preferences for distribution are at the individual level.
How can you use it in the index when you use the trust numbers to get this? You said that why you assign some to negative or positive.
Yes, it was the reason.
To trust. But then it's endogenous, right?
No. We just ran, previously at first we ran individual regressions where the dependent variables were just these different groups of people, and independent variable was trust with some of the controls. And in these regressions, we had positive or negative influence of trust, and then we constructed an index. So it's just an aggregation. So this index is only for these preferences for distribution, and they are at the individual level. Then trust, generalized trust. Yeah, it doesn't contain trust. Then trust is it's our main variable of interest. It's at the region level. I'll explain a little bit later how it's calculated. And then, of course, different control variables, individual level and regional level controls. Then second estimation shows you how we calculate trust. First of all, we ran regressions of individual level trust on different socio-demographic parameters such as age, gender, wealth, nationality, city type, and so on. And of course, we include regional dummies. Then we get regional fixed effects for this regression, aggregate them on the regional level, and this is our pure regional level trust that is free for this, from these basic parameters. And we insert this trust in the first regression. So in this first regression, only trust is at the individual level. Not only, but our main variable of interest is at the regional level, not at the individual level. And the distribution preferences are at the individual level. And it's worthwhile to mention again that trust is only for 2007, 8, and 9, and distribution preferences are only for 2011. So that's why we don't have trust for 2011, and we can't use individual level trust. But so these tricky estimations are also because of the limitations of data. But one of our colleagues, Israel Marquez from Columbia University, he was very happy with these kind of models, and he said, "Oh, maybe this can be treated as a novel instrumentation strategy, because here trust serves as an instrument for itself." So we can discuss it later. There are some sub-arguments how we can explain it, but anyway, maybe for political scientists it's well. Our main results. So because I have only 1 minute, I just say that we confirm our hypothesis. I show you only one of the tables, and we ran lots of regressions with different sets of regional controls, with different individual level controls. And the results for trust are highly robust. Trust loses its significance only in the presence of solidarity. So the other one variable, social capital variable. And it can be seen as an indicator that here we deal not only with the trust, but with social capital influence on preferences for distribution. So as I said, we confirm our hypothesis. We do, of course, lots of cross checks, but the main problem for us. So the main problem is, okay, we have an interesting observation. We made some equations, but we are trying to empirically discriminate between different hypotheses that can explain the precise mechanism why there is such evidence that people want to, if an individual who lives in high trust environment wants to reward distinguished people and doesn't want to help needy people. And also, for us it's a question whether the results are country specific or not, because now they are based mostly on, so not mostly, they are based on Russia. And now we also provide estimations for life and transition survey. We are lucky that they have the same question on the distribution to different target groups. So thank you very much for your attention. It will be very interesting to hear your comments and questions.
Questions? Yes.
So I have several questions which we can discuss later on, but the main conceptual thing is you mentioned this Benabutiro paper and sort of as a justification for why trust, generalized trust, may actually explain preferences for redistribution. So my question is, how exactly is that link, and can you elaborate on why it would be the case that people who have higher, or regions who have higher generalized trust would actually prefer more redistribution? Because you don't know the target, and more redistribution for the merit, sorry, for the needy, right? So
No, for
so
merit.
the other way around, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So what is the connection here? I'm not really clear.
The connection is through the question about perceptions of luck or of perceptions of effort. So trust is connected. There is a correlation, a stable correlation between trust and the perception of whether it's a question of luck that an individual is successful in life or it's a question of individual effort. So through this variable.
But it doesn't mean that, so you're saying that the connection is just belief in the just society.
Yes, yes.
But I don't see an immediate connection between trust and the belief in a just society. Because you are controlling for corruption perceptions.
Yeah.
That, according to the theory of Benabou and Tirole, would be even a better variable of interest.
No, we can discuss later. You have questions, more precise questions for Benabou and Tirole theory. I haven't discussed it because now we don't have clear evidence. That's why I didn't present it here. So, but it's another variable, not perceptions of trust.
There was a question. No? So, yeah, I want to ask a question. So, you use a lot of controls on individual level, regional level, and yet your R-square is just 5%. So, it seems kind of, these many variables don't explain, explain very little of the variation in the redistribution preferences. So, why do you think is the case?
But you also see that the number of observations is very high. And then return to the slides about different variables that are studied. Of course, preferences or distribution, they are largely determined by lots of factors. Largely determined by this fairness, altruism, cultural variance, historic experience, and so on. Trust and civicness, they are shown to matter, but of course they are among lots of other variables. So of course they can't explain all the differences.
Okay, and so related question, what is the effect of the trust?
I
Right?
forgot.
So kind of quantitative.
Yes. It's economically significant. It's comparable to the size of the effect of social expenditures in a region to some objective variables.
But in terms of redistribution preference, so if
In terms of standard deviations, I mean.
so if you take two people, they're exactly the same, just one answers no trust on the trust question, the other answers trust. So in terms of their redistribution preferences on average, what is the effect? Do they want to redistribute to, I don't know, whom or how much on average?
You mean what is the difference between an individual who, in terms of standard deviations?
Okay.
I don't remember. I just remember that it's comparable to other important variables such as social expenditures. Maybe it's well, I don't remember now. It was economically significant for sure. I don't remember.
Yeah. Okay, Alex. Yeah.
Can I go back to John's question because I have the same concern? So when you have your bar chart with 46% on the top when you do the ranking, so you run a separate regression for each question. That therefore is a function of trust. Then you say, I'm going to take that function. So you have, it's some function, it doesn't matter what it is. It takes trust to this number. And you say, I'm going to take this number to +3 to -3, which means that the score that you have in the index is a function of trust.
No. Maybe I've explained that. No.
Okay. To get this number, to get this 46, you regress the...
No. This number, this descriptive statistics it's just descriptive statistics.
So where does trust come into this?
Trust is just trust from trust.
So how do you get the -3 to +3? That's the part.
It's just, well, minus, so we have different groups of people. Okay, maybe Andre.
I can explain the cause of this paper. Actually, we need to deal with this index because of the question.
Whose index? Where does the index come from?
The question asked to choose up to three categories, and not all, but only three most important categories. We actually cannot run regression for each group because it may not be chosen not because it doesn't desire support, but because some other group needs more help. And Well, one of the solutions is to aggregate these groups and try to
Just
run
an aggregation.
these aggregate categories, and that's what we are doing.
But I want to know exactly what aggregation, that's what I'm confused about. I think all of us, I think several of us are
Where does
confused.
the +3 come from? So your son.
I mean,
From individual
it was
aggregation.
comes from because it's up to 3 categories maybe chosen. So if,
Yes.
if there are for each resident chooses 3 categories, if he or she choose I mean all 3 categories from one group, it will be +3. If
The maximum of plus. Yeah.
if chose all 3 groups from negative group, it would be -3. And if he or she chose something in between, it would be 1.
But why is something in the negative or positive group? Isn't that arbitrary?
So actually, that's my question. So here, the way you categorize.
That's also what I'm asking.
Right, so that's what we're
individual
asking.
aggregation.
That's an indulgence, right? Like if
This is merit versus need. So the categories are merit versus need. But
Yes.
I think this is problematic.
Marriage versus needs.
Because what if I put families with children as married and just shove it up there, whereas I put retired as non-married?
So you have to convince us about the categories. And I think here, I wouldn't say that, for instance, disabled person can.
Disabled, they're not, of course. Except disabled, the first 4 categories, they are married. So retired also, they worked hard. So in terms of this also concept, just world beliefs. So these old people, they worked hard, they made an effort. So except disabled, of course,
Yeah.
they made an effort. So they are married people. Then these 5 categories of people, they are the needy people.
But you have to add disabled to the needy group, I would say.
It's I understand
They
that.
are in need.
But, or you could say
Okay.
Russia's trying to encourage more babies, right? So why shouldn't families with children be in the married group?
In general terms, they are in terms of welfare state, they are needier. But okay, I understand.
That's what I'm saying, it's subjective, perfect.
But again, our results are highly consistent to different estimations of the index, to different regressions. They are not only for this redistribution index. They are not dependent on this index.
No, so they work even if you just mix them up?
Yes.
So if I took 3 from down, moved up there, 3 from the top, moved down, your regression will still work?
Because there are some, we omitted, for example, retired, we omitted some categories, and the result, they are highly persistent to these changes.
No, I'm not omitting, I'm saying reversing. So if I mix half and half.
For example,
The result, if you mix the whole, the entire won't work.
entirely of course. But for second,
I mean, my feeling is that this argument is not super strong, and we need some to think more about it. But still, we tried factor analysis to somehow
it's the same.
classify these categories, and factor analysis results in quite similar distribution.
no, if we mix, for example, there are some categories that are questioned, yeah? For example, retired, families with one parent, and families with many children. If we drop them or add to other categories, the results fall for these suspicious categories. Of course, if we mix them completely, we don't have the result. But in this case, we don't have theory also. So,
Okay, so the very last question, and then yes.
Yeah, maybe it's a good idea to run a separate survey to ask Russian people who they believe to be well, in need and deserving, not distinguished professors.
for us. Yes, it's one of the questions for us, of course. Also because in different welfare states, in Europe or in USA, there are different definitions for different. Yes, for us it's one of the questions, because it's also a question how this paper, how foreigners react to this paper. Yeah, I know.
Okay,
It's
so
a difficult one.
thank you very much.